Hello, BookTube. Well, it's a bleak and barren Sunday here at Hyde Cottage. And for those of you who are new, who've tipped us well over 4,000 subscribers, that's my whiny term for Sundays when there is no mail, when Steve gets no free books to while away his time. And what I usually do on Sunday is while away my time in other ways, including by doing a tag. And I was tagged uh, this time around by Miriam from Between Lines in Life, and her tag, well, it only makes things worse. Her heart was in the right place, but her tag is about philosophy, which is where good thinking and good writing go to die. So, I've got it on the yoga book here, and I'm gonna go through it anyway because even though the tag was about philosophy, the questions are really good. Uh, as her questions always are. It's just she couldn't possibly have known. I've been reading philosophy from the beginning, and it has virtually never. In fact, I might even remove the qualifier. I might say it's never produced a piece of writing that's worth the time to take to read it, much less to think about it, or to ponder it, or to write about it, or to form a school around it. All of these things strike me as insane, and yet there are people who are philosophy majors right now as we speak. But I don't have to like the subject matter to like the questions. So I thought we'd go through them and see what we have here. She goes in. She starts off with the right at the very beginning with Thales. So question number one is Thales is considered the first known philosopher. Which text introduced you to philosophy, or which text would you like to read to get you into philosophy? I have read many, many, many texts about philosophy. The one that introduced me to it was The Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius. But I have yet to find one that got me into philosophy. I'll let you know if it ever happens, but I think it's highly unlikely. I would rather read prose that's about something than prose that's about the concept of prose being about something. Once you get 10 removes away from anything, then I don't see the point, except maybe to avoid manual labor. Question number two is Karl Marx is a political philosopher turning the world upside down with a communist manifesto. Which political event or event in history would you like to read more about in fiction? We'll leave aside whether or not Karl Marx actually did that. My answer to the question, believe it or not, is the American Revolution. Uh, uh, I'm speaking here without national chauvinism. It's a fairly pivotal event in the modern era, the Enlightenment era of the world, and yet its treatment in fiction. I've read a large number of novels set in the American Revolution. I've never read one that really did the job or even came close. I've read no American Revolution book that comes close to being to the American Revolution what, for instance, Michael Shar's book The Killer Angels is to the American Civil War. And there are 4 or 5 other Civil War, When This War Is Over by Stephen Beckett, and a bunch of others. And also, of course, World War II, World War I, they all have classic novels. But where is the classic novel of the American Revolution? And I don't really understand that. It just doesn't seem to be there. Maybe I've missed it, but I've looked really hard for the last 28 years. So that would be it. I would like somebody to write a great historical fiction epic about the American Revolution. Although I'm perfectly content to read histories of the American Revolution instead. Question number 3. Jean-Jacques Rousseau highly influenced the Enlightenment, a period in which introduced critical thinking to the common people. Which book or author forced you to think more critically? Well, again, we will skip over the fact that you're telling the Irish monks of the 12th century that they had no idea how to think critically, that you're telling St. Augustine he had no idea how to think critically. Instead, we'll just accept the premise and talk about critical writing, and there are many, many candidates. Most of them are in this room. They make it into this room where other books don't. But the one I had in mind, the first one that came to mind was Randall Jarrett, who's a poetry critic, but is great. He wrote a book called Poetry and the Age, which is well worth your time. If you like poetry at all, he's well worth your time. But even if you don't, I am almost I'm uninterested in almost all of the poets that he discusses at length, and I love his prose. It doesn't matter that I don't like the poets. I just love his prose. Same thing's true with the poetry critic Helen Vendler. I love everything she writes, even though she spends huge amounts of time writing about authors that I wouldn't pick up with a gun to my head. So it's a testament to their writing ability. So I'm going to say Randall Jarrell for this one. Then question number 4 is Voltaire once said, "I do not agree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. Which is a popular book everyone seems to love, but you didn't?" And once again, we're going to overlook the question here because Voltaire didn't say that. But my answer, there are many, of course, many, many, many answers to this question. I am on the other side of popular opinion quite often. But a recent big example that was received everywhere with hosannas of praise that I didn't like at all was Manhattan Beach by Jennifer Egan, the author of Visit from the Goon Squad, which also was the subject of hosannas of praise, and which I also didn't like. So now I'm wondering, am I just going to be the one naysayer in the back of the Coliseum for this author for the rest of her career? I have no idea. Manhattan Beach was by any register, it was a huge success, critically, financially. So maybe I'll revisit it. I'm certain I will get the paperback. Maybe I'll revisit it and see if it's possible that I missed. But usually that's not how it works. I love revisiting books, as I say on this channel all the time. I view the paperback release as an invitation to revisit the book. I especially like it when the book didn't do all that much for me. Then I love revisiting it and seeing, okay, here you go. I'll clear my mind. You get a second chance. Only it's not the same chance because I already know you. So now I'm giving you literally a second chance to make a first impression. I love doing that, and I do often change my mind when I do that. But one thing that seldom happens is that I will read a book and think that it's just flat out boring and then change my mind. So we'll see. I will give it a try and I will report back. But for now, the answer here is Manhattan Beach, definitely. Question number 5, Hannah Arendt. There had to be somebody on here that I liked. Deemed controversial even by her friends, Hannah Arendt did not shy away from telling what she thought was true. Name a book that will leave readers uncomfortable, but tells an important story. And the one that I want to pick is by Naomi Riley. It's fairly recent. I think it came out 2 years ago. Called The New Trail of Tears, which is just scathing. It's brilliantly written and brutal. It doesn't let you up off the mat, even for a single page, about the plight of American Indians in America on the reservation system that runs throughout, large parts of the American Midwest and West and South. It's an examination of that reservation system and its iniquities, and it's brutal, just brutal, and difficult to read, of course, because there's nowhere to go, especially if you're an American, or in my case, a proud American. There's nowhere to go on this subject. There's nowhere to go on it that makes you feel comfortable. With other national sins, it's possible to find some small measure of mitigation. But with American Indians, there isn't. They're penned on reservations. The reservations themselves are hellholes, just deprived of any living conditions whatsoever. And the history of how these peoples got there is just one long, unbroken string of treachery on behalf of the United States government and all of its representatives. So you look at the carefully preserved treaties, the actual documents that representatives of the United States government signed with the independent nations that they had conquered. And the treaties are completely unambiguous. You will have from this river to this river as your possession, not a state in the government, not a part of the American government, not a tributary to it, and you will have this land forever. Forever is not an ambiguous word, and none of those treaties were honored in any way. Some of them were violated while the ink was still wet, And so you can't get away from the subject. There's no way to make yourself feel in any way good about it, or in any way even neutral about it. And that's kind of what the question is getting at here. The book just doesn't let you go. It doesn't let up. But it's well worth reading. It's important to read. Especially if, well, not especially. It's important for any American to read it. Most Americans, unfortunately, will not. But if you've ever visited, I have visited Indian reservations, and this book will tell you a lot about what you saw that maybe you didn't notice when you were there, or that maybe you weren't sure to believe. It'll be at your library. If you're an American, you need to read it. And then let's see here. Question number 6. You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. And since that quote is melodramatic and makes not one bit of sense, I probably don't need to tell you who said it, do I? A wonderful quote from Nietzsche from Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Which book do you go back to for its beautiful writing? Nietzsche never wrote anything beautiful in his own language. And that's because Nietzsche never wrote a single line of prose as an adult in which he was not clinically insane. He had severely debilitating physical illness throughout his entire productive career. So when you read his books, Thus Spoke Zarathustra or anything else, you're right. You are literally reading the ravings of a madman. and one of the problems that I have with philosophy as a genre, as a discipline, if you want to call it that, is that Nietzsche is honored, because when it comes to the torture that philosophy inflicts on language, it's impossible to tell if somebody's crazy or not. So you can have what is obviously the disjointed ramblings of a lunatic on the page in front of you, and you can say, well, it reads like a lot of other philosophy that I've read. But anyway, the answer to the question of beautiful prose, there are lots of candidates, of course. But the one that came to my mind is someone I mentioned on this channel before. I can't praise her highly enough. Annie Dillard writes beautiful prose. If you have not read Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, that too will be at your library. Go and find it and read it. You will love it. It will stick with you. It's an American classic. And then, let's see here. Question number 7. Jean-Paul Sartre, oh God, raised the question, what is literature? In one of his books. What is good literature for you? And I should point out that when Sartre asked that question, he wasn't asking it Socratically to stir conversation and debate and maybe to undercut some of our certainties. He was literally asking it because he was not only a bad writer but a moron. He was literally asking, what is this literature? So when it comes to, what was it again here? What is good literature for you? Whatever it is, for me, it won't be found in the philosophy section. Then question number 8 is Albert Camus. Which book did you have to keep pushing through because you really wanted to understand its meaning? And I know that this question probably looks to big works of philosophy, Being and Nothingness, that sort of thing. And I have pushed my way through those books and regretted it. I've regretted the time that I wasted doing so. They are gigantic works of convoluted garbage about nothing. But I'm not reflecting the question on philosophy. I know that the question probably derives from big, dense philosophical works that make up a word, and they make up words to describe the word, and they make up words that undercut the meaning of the words made up to describe the word, and then make up an entire epistemology about the words that have been made up to undercut the validity of the words that were made up to understand the words, until you just want to slap the person who's writing it. But I'm not going to use it for philosophy. Instead, the thing that I had was by George Musser, a book by George Musser called Spooky Action at a Distance, which is his book about quantum mechanics and quantum theory. It's not long. It's not a long book, but I had to pause on almost every page to try and push my way through, to try and make myself understand what was being talked about in this book. And I didn't get very far. I mean, I finished the book, but I didn't get very far in understanding it. Quantum superpositioning, quantum echoing, where two quantum particles that are in the same orientation can be separated by an entire galaxy of distance. And when you change the orientation of one, the orientation of the other instantly changes. They remain in some sort of rapport with each other that transmits changes much, much faster than the speed of light, which is theoretically the limit. That's not supposed to be possible. There's no way to understand that, and yet that happens. And not only does it happen, but it can be manipulated. There have been experiments in the last year in which that is manipulated over distance. Effectively, the first quantum phone call has already been made, and stuff like that just keeps coming at you when you look into quantum mechanics. Even if you read Musser's book is great. It's as simple and as approachable as I imagine any book on this subject could be. And yet, on every page, you're thinking, your first reaction is, well, that's really strange. I wonder what the world would be like if things were really like that. And then you realize, no, this is the world. This isn't theory. This is true. The quantum world does work this way, and it doesn't make any sense at all to the macro world. See, I'm getting all worked up, as I did in that book. Well, another reason that I had to push through it is because on every page I was stopping to argue, because so much of it is counterintuitive, counter-experiential, that I just I highly recommend Spooky Action at a Distance. And let's see here. Question number 9 is the last one, and I admit all of this ranting has indeed taken my mind off my bleak and barren Sunday. But question number 9 is, which are the 3 philosophers you would love to sit down and have a chat with? And I would love that. I would invite Descartes, Kant, and Heidegger over here to Hyde Cottage, and we would have a chat. I would make them some scrambled eggs and maybe some a baked potato each, and I would serve them wine, and we would have a nice chat about philosophical systems and modes of thought. But I would have poisoned their food so that gradually they would weaken and then die. And I would try, if I had control over this dinner, I would try to get each one of them at around age 15 so that I retroactively stopped them from writing any of the garbage that they went on to write. So I'd have a little bit to explain to the Boston police when they showed up at the crime scene. But if I explained to them, since the Boston police would all be from Southie, if I said to them, these guys are going to grow up to write these books, and I showed them on my phone, they'd say, yeah, it looks like an accident to me. So I don't think I'd see the inside of a courtroom, much less a jail cell. But anyway, that is the philosophy book tag, and it did cure me, even though I had to beat it up a little. So I want to thank Miriam for that. I'm sure she had my bleak and barren Sunday in mind, and it worked. So I'm gonna wrap this up for now, and I will be back soon. Thank you, BookTube.